Welcome to the Land Pioneers podcast, where we delve into the ins and outs of land developers all around Australia. And today we've got a very special guest, Damon Nagel from Kite Property. About 5 years or 6 years ago, when we first came to Adelaide, I've seen Starfish Developments and Kite Property as one of the major players in the industry. They were involved with some pretty large projects, and I was really keen to meet them and understand all the sort of insights on how they came to be there. And so then when I met Damon socially, it was like, oh, wow, this is really, really cool. And we talked probably for a couple of hours about everything outside of property, which was really cool. So, today I've finally got Damon to talk about his journey to development. So just a little bit about Damon. So over the last couple of decades of fairly diverse real estate expertise, Damon is a very prominent figure in South Australia's property development industry. He started as the founder and managing director of Starfish Developments and has led the way in creating exceptional projects in prime Australian locations. His leadership at Ironfish as managing director for the last 15 years or so showcased his ability to drive integrated property investment strategies and foster business innovation. In his spare time, Damon's also a passionate winemaker, and his hands-on approach as the owner of the Brackenwood Vineyard shows his commitment to viticulture and quality winemaking. And then, to top it all off, Damon's also a helicopter pilot. So that adds a completely different aspect of his broader interests and daring spirit, adding a unique dimension to his multifaceted career. And maybe that's the secret. While flying, he gets to see real estate from a completely different perspective. So, as the managing director of Kite Projects, Damon is currently in charge of some pretty large-scale projects, such as the highly regarded 700-odd unit Block 1 project in Port Adelaide, as well as some upcoming boutique land subdivisions in Byron Vale. Projects of this nature highlight Damon's dedication to sustainable development and his reputation for expertise in land development. So I'm really excited to hear a lot more about Damon's journey, but first, just quickly about the Land Pioneers podcast. It's brought to you by us from Eagle Vision. And at Eagle Vision, we're your trusted partners in property development, driven by a commitment to transparency, a straightforward process, and a deep passion for helping our clients create sustainable legacies that will endure for generations. So what are the 3 whys for a land developer to work with Eagle Vision and where we may be a good fit? Less is more, 24/7, and no surprises. Less is more. So with our background in property development, the strategy of effective 3D visuals is, we feel, the most important component. It takes priority over everything else. And after nearly 700 projects completed in over 15 years of operation, we're confident in what we have. 24/7. So having our team based in Australia and Europe, we work on a 24-hour turnaround basis to increase pace for our clients and their projects. And finally, no surprises. We pride ourselves on transparency in operation, with systems and processes to involve our clients at every step. They get to see the inner workings of the machine and track the progress of the projects. We're constantly thinking of new ideas and experimenting on these in order to ensure the best return on their investment, such as interactive master plans for large-scale land communities. Track and analyze buyer behavior and utilize the data for informed decision-making, such as which lots are attracting the most interest. Experience the future today. Visit us at eaglevision.com.au to discover a world of possibilities. And now back to our guest. So, Damon, could you start with maybe sharing a little bit about the beginnings of your journey in property development?
Sure. So we started as we're a marketing sales business initially through Ironfish, which was founded by a gentleman in Sydney, Joseph Cho. Joseph and I set up the Adelaide office here in 2006. When we had the tail end of the GFC in 2010, developers were not providing a product for us to sell, mainly through, the confidence, but also funding hurdles that they had to hit that were probably more onerous than previously. We still had the ability to sell to clients, and from there we came up with a strategy of delivering some of our own product. We'd also, over a number of years, had become frustrated with how many developers delivered product. We were very much at that customer face basis. rather than being a builder developer. We came from that sort of sales, customer service side. So for us, we approached it very much with a focus on the end consumer. And we designed groups of 10 townhouses, and we did 3 of those and sold them successfully, delivered them well on time, and interestingly under budget, which is something it is a little bit more difficult to do these days. We are a built form developer as well, I should add. So we buy land, we will subdivide land, and then we deliver the built form on it through a building partner that we'll work with. We then sort of scaled that to 40 townhouses, and we sold that within 30 days. We then went to low-rise apartments. We built 50 apartments over 5 stories. We sold that in 90 days. And then we felt we were quite bullish, and we had an opportunity to buy some land in Ascot Waters in Perth, which is sort of in between, I guess, the city and the airport, a bit closer to the airport, but great location and on the river. So we delivered that. There was 35 apartments there. That was a good project, but we really caught the very, I guess, end of the Perth boom. And we managed just to get out of that in time. We ended up left with 2 out of the 35, which we've held. And then as the Perth market moves, we'll sell those. But what we did learn, I think, from doing the Perth experiment was it's very hard to run a development remotely. And we felt that, we didn't need to be the biggest developer. We just wanted to be perhaps one that had more control and deal with less stress. So it was a good experiment, and it sort of taught us, I guess, to focus on our local market. Obviously, from there, we then moved into high-rise development in Adelaide and built at the time what was the tallest residential building in Adelaide, at 28 stories, 210 apartments. And that was really probably the kick-off to the Adelaide apartment market. From there, we've had, I think, 12 apartment buildings in excess of 200 apartments have followed that development. And prior to the development that we started there, Adelaide had not seen an apartment building over 100 apartments for over 12 years. So it was quite a gap, or a long time between drinks. We finished in the city with our second apartment building of 230 apartments. And I felt at that time that the apartment market was becoming, Adelaide's a small market, so it's very easy to saturate a particular sector. And we felt that sector was becoming saturated with a lot of players. And the thing that concerned me was there were a lot of players who were either interstate or overseas, not really understanding the nuance of the market here. And I felt that they could do damage to the perception within the local market of what apartments are doing. So we moved across into land development and partnered with Divine Homes on a infill. It's a bit of a quasi infill site and brownfield site. So it was an old boys' jail set on 18 hectares, and there was a horse club as well that had been defunct for about 40 years, and a city dump. So that was provided some challenges.
Quite unique.
Yeah. And we turned the city dump, so we remediated it and turned it into a park. And I was reflecting back over the new year. That park is probably at the moment one of the things I'm most proud that we've delivered. So it's kind of funny that we're a developer and I'm most proud of a park. We spent over $3 million. 60,000 square meters. There's 3 phases to it. There's a very formal phase where there's a lot of work going on, like detention basins and a lot of activity spaces for residents. And then there's a transition place that we created a semi-formal, semi-informal setting, a rural setting with and created using the natural amphitheatre. We've actually formalised an amphitheatre where we've seen local schools holding performances there. So that's been a really great outcome that we've got, community engagement and connection with the amenity. And then at the back of it, it was very much a beautiful bushland. it was being strangled by. We took out about 20,000 wild olive trees, and that was an absolute process and a half to olives, and they'd been wild for over 40, 50 years. So some of the trunks were over a
really
metre.
producing.
Yeah, no, they were wild olives. Like not even the local, Mediterranean community weren't even collecting them. So it probably shows you the pretty poor quality, right? So, but we got rid of that, and I think some of the things that, again, just being super proud was, with some of the trees that we have, people now have access to, and these trees are, over 300 years old, and I find myself looking at them. The trunks are, the girth would be over 6 meters, or probably 8 meters. They're huge, and I look at these, beautiful river red gums, and I think to myself, when this tree was a sapling, there was no white man in Australia, or white person in Australia. So, it really puts you to a place in time and makes you reflect. And then I think about, what will this park look like in 300 years' time, right? So, and I certainly know, my grandchildren's grandchildren will be able to use that space. So that's kind of a nice legacy, I feel, and that's probably, one of the things that when we transitioned from Starfish to Kite, was, I guess, twofold. It was Joseph and I coming to a mutual agreement that we would, he would focus on his investment business, and I would focus on the development business. One of the proudest things when we did do the separation that year, which was the end of 22, was that we've still remained close friends. And that was probably one of my biggest wins for 22, to separate from a long-term
relationship.
Yeah, and still maintain, respect and whatnot. But, Joseph's a highly intelligent and very thoughtful man, and so I'm grateful that we're still friends. I guess the other sort of moving into that, we had moved from that sort of very much an investment-driven development business to a community-based development business. We were selling 90% of our product in Starfish was to investors, and we're now selling 80% of our product is to owner-occupiers. So it's a very, very different shift in that meld, and the way in which you interact with the customer, the way in which the selling process is very different. Their expectations are very different, and then the after-sales service is completely different. But we're still learning a lot. We've made mistakes along the way with those things, but I think by and large the team's heart's in the right place. We're committed to delivering value for all stakeholders, and including local and state governments. There's a lot of talk about taxes and affordability, and we're really seeing at the moment. I think Mike Zobel from Property Council stated at the press club yesterday, 30 to 40% of property values are taxes along 8 realms in which you pay, and I'm not sure how it'd be pretty close to accurate, that certainly 30%. So we're delivering great revenue for the community. I don't begrudge paying the tax at all, as long as the money is then spent wisely. That's where I get on my high horse. We've spent over $5 million in open space levies, and I don't know where that money's gone. There's nothing tangible that's been left for the community. Ultimately, the people who move into those projects pay that. Yeah. So, I think that's really important. And I think the other area that's important is that, councils are collecting revenue and doing a good job with maintaining the legacy. And many developers, I'm sure, who would listen would agree. You spend all this money in these entry statements, in streetscapes and parks, and then you leave and you find that the council then doesn't maintain to the standards. Yes, at this point they're collecting, full freight on their rates and taxes and levies, and I think that's really unfair on the community. And I believe that the community should hold local councils to account. They're very happy to take all the money, they're not happy to then invest back into the community. And I think, that's again one of the things I struggle with. I think over the way our systems work. I will come on to a little bit about the planning and dealing with councils, but I guess just finishing on the sort of leaving legacy items, designing, homes where we know that people are going to connect with their neighbours, designing homes where they are going to be more environmentally friendly, either through choice of material, I guess considering solar direction. So we're very, very big on that whole sort of solar direction, larger eaves on north and west facing parts of the building, less and smaller windows, larger windows and less eaves on south facing, to create, I guess, that form and livability within dwellings. Thinking about how, where do prevailing winds come from? How do you most effectively generate best use of cross-flow ventilation? Things like that are things that we consider at length. So I'm finding that probably a big challenge, but also the most rewarding. And I guess again coming back to government and their input into development, all the changes within the building codes that are rolling out, with the disability and the star rating systems. And whilst I think they're coming from the right place, I think the outcome is detrimental. The cost to provide a home that has the ability for any mobile impaired person is, we're hearing numbers between $5,000 to $15,000 a dwelling. Now, if you're retrofitting a home, it's probably about $30,000 to $40,000, so it's a very expensive. I don't know why we don't pay a $2,000 levy into a home, and then if somebody with a mobility issue needs to move into a home, they can apply to that fund to get a grant to make their home mobility friendly. The advantage of that is it can also be done for historic homes as well, homes that are built today. So it actually allows for those people with mobility issues, or visual issues and hearing issues, etc. That they can actually provide. It's a way better outcome they can provide across all housing rather than just new housing. And the impost on, the reality is it's less than 5% of the population will ever use this benefit, yet 95% of the population are paying for it. And I don't want to be mistaken for not wanting to provide this. I just think we need to be more considered on how we're providing it to make sure we're getting a better outcome for those people that really do need that assistance in their homes. So I think, policy...
Strategic forethought.
Absolutely. Policy is a big thing. And I think, we need to be discussing, this as a development community, and we need to be losing this us and them mentality between government and developers, which is very much what I'm seeing. And look, there's probably a segue into, I wanted to finish a little bit more on legacy, but, the segue into what the planning system's providing, the very confrontational way in which you start a process, the way in which councils, start with no, and, and then you've got to work, why no and what is the no for. And you might find the no is really only 15% of what you proposed. And if you knew that, you can work with it. As I've mentioned to you, before, when we go into an area with a new council, the time in which it takes us to get plans is twice as long as it should be. And then if we stick with that council and we do another development there, we tend to find the next development is reduced by probably, over 40%, saving. And then the next one's probably over 60% in saving. And the irony of this, maybe I will name Port Adelaide Enfield Council, has probably been one of the most trickiest councils when we first started. But now I'm really pleased that, they're a proactive with us anyway. They've been proactive. They're problems. They come with a problem-solving attitude, and it's refreshing. And it's collaborative. We leave meetings feeling kindred, not spiteful. And I think that we had to work a lot on levels of respect and making sure that there was that mutual respect. And if you disagreed with the other party, articulate it. That was the thing that, like, if no, let us understand why it's no. And as recently as last week, we've put in some new plans for Dock 1, and they were talking about wayfaring and paths, and I didn't understand it. When they explained it, I'm like, yeah, your idea is a much better outcome. So what can we do to make that work? And again, we're collaborative. And then we've come up with some pretty innovative landscaping suggestions down there, which was really hard for council to get their head around. And we spent a lot of time articulating with the landscape architects and their internal team why this would be a benefit, why it would create more use, more connection. So we're basically rolling out grass down a promenade. We don't know anywhere where that's done, certainly in South Australia. And what we want to do, I'd love to see people walking down the promenade in bare feet. You don't do that, right? Like, it's just not done in a dock situation. But it's half the promenade will be grass. And then the types of trees, trees where along the promenade where people want, the residents don't want to lose their view, but you also need to create trees that are going to provide, shelter and shade. And so there's a lot of thoughtfulness there. And again, it comes back to, I think, again, I'm jumping all over the shop, but that legacy side with the master planning of developments is thinking about how people are going to use that space, use those public areas that you're creating. The tokenistic pocket parks with a tokenistic bench and a couple of, we see them around. They just don't get used. If they're put in an area,
are trying to increase yield.
Yeah. If they're put into an area where people are commuting, or there's a vantage point because it's peaceful, or there's a view, or there's some tranquility or something, or those things create that. I'm quite into. I think a lot of people have been going to Japan in recent months. It seems to be the hot flavour. I've been fortunate enough to go twice in the last 6 months. But one of the things I've really enjoyed about the trip is understanding their culture and more. They have a term called or a philosophy called forest bathing. And when you look into it, it's it makes a lot of sense. People feel calm and at ease when they're surrounded by natural environment. And this particular philosophy talks about you need to be doing more engaging with nature, forest bathing. So and that is something that we take at the forefront of when designing, is how are people going to connect with nature. Again, I talked about being a built form developer that provides community, but community needs to engage with the parks and the landscape. You can also create landscape via views as well. So we've up at Hamilton Hill near in the eastern suburbs near Ross Trevor, we've got some of the most spectacular views in Adelaide, and we've captured and utilised those designs. So that gives you the feeling of space and the sunsets, because they're west facing. The sunsets are just spectacular. We do, if anyone's watched us at Adelaide Oval at any games, when it's dusk there, it's probably one of the most beautiful grounds in the world when the sun sets at Adelaide Oval. It's amazing. So I guess using those, I know I'm chopping and changing a little bit. Sorry, Stan. I'll come back to a little bit of policy stuff. And the timing and working with councils is providing difficult. I couldn't imagine starting a development company today. We were very fortunate when we started our development company. I think the opportunities that we had and perhaps some of the challenges that we're facing today weren't necessarily there last time. So what I'm finding now is, it is more complicated. There are way more layers of complexity and red tape. We've got a new planning system that was implemented here last year And what we found was it took councils less than 3 months to work out how to slow it down. You know, the system in place, the designers or the architects, for want of a better term, of that system had all the right ideas and all the right intentions, yet it took the people who are operating the system less than 3 months to work out. And it's now slower than what the old system was. And I talked to the minister, and he's like, no, it's not. That's not what the data's telling me. I'm like, well, mate, I'm knees deep in this, and I can tell you, and every developer I know has said exactly the same thing. So, the system is flawed, and they spent hundreds of millions of dollars on this new system, and again, I think it's not a matter of, ripping it up and starting again. I think that the basis or the foundations of the system works, but they've got to stop the way in which councils are able to slow the process down through, remove those levers on slowing them down, make sure councils are accountable. We've had examples. It's meant to be, you put your plans in 90 days for any RFIs and any, further requests for information. We found that we were through the process and we were up to 9 months, and we were still getting RFIs and they still weren't. And it's at what point do you go, no more? This is ridiculous. Think about it for your 90 days. And if you miss that point, then you miss that point. That's on you, sunshine, right? So, it's frustrating in that sense. But, I guess understanding that councils are under-resourced, they lose their staff retention is appalling. I've gone through processes with councils where we've dealt with 3 assessment members because the current one leaves, and then you've got to go back and kind of not retrain, but reestablish a relationship with that person, and it's convoluted. I was at a social event with Maria Palumbo, who's a lady here who runs a social, not-for-profit housing, Junction, Australia. And Maria's been in the game for quite some time and very experienced. She talked about a system to me about having councils pool their resources. So you might have 3 councils, 4 or 5 councils. They each have depending on the size of their shire or their area, they contribute, or the volume of work, or maybe it's on a dollar value. There's probably a mechanism that's relatively easy and simple to work out, and that they put these funds together in a pooled scenario and hire specialists to run their planning, and you would have a much more efficient system because you would get economies of scale. You would have a much better planning system because you would attract a higher quality town planner because they would be working across larger scale projects, more diverse projects. And that's what we find. You go to an area that has never dealt with apartments, and we've done this before, and they're all looking at this building going, oh, I don't understand it. Or you go to an area where you're looking to, like a land division, and we've spoken about McLaren Flat. It's a beautiful township in the southern vales of the McLaren Vale wine region, really underdeveloped, constrained by wastewater, and council couldn't get their head around providing smaller lots to provide for affordable, still keeping the same number of dwellings through the development. So having a much greater diversity, and they just could not get their head around this. And now what we've been left with is a development where, the price point's much more compressed, but we've really taken out, it will be a development that is not for first-time buyers, unless they're wealthy, will not be able to afford to buy in this project. And that saddens me a little bit because, well, not a little bit, it saddens me a lot, because I like diversity in developments. Again, looking back at either Asian or Japanese cultures, and you see multi-generational houses, and I believe we need to see multi-generational developments. You need to have, first-time buyers, first-time families, older children families, and retirees in the development. And that creates, for me, a true community. And we've seen that in some of the projects that we've worked on. And I've seen that in many of the study tours that I've been a part of. So, but council don't get that. When I explain the vision and what we're trying to achieve, they just look at me like, I'm speaking a foreign language. I don't know if they don't understand or if they don't care. I can't work that bit out, or if it's both.
So what I know is, just switching slightly, is that in Victoria there's a mechanism that when a council doesn't make a decision, there's an ability to go to a higher court or a mediation authority. Is there anything like that here in South Australia?
Yeah, there is. There's the ERD court, and that's run by commissioners, right? It's still set up with a legal framework that has to preside over the Act and law. So it becomes down not to, best case scenario. It comes down to very, very legal issues. We actually, McLaren Flat, were forced to go down that process because we couldn't get resolution with council. We had been, 9 months in. And again, council don't think about the cost of funding for us and the loss of opportunity. We could have been in market a year earlier. That means there's a year that families who don't have homes could have had homes. And again, there doesn't seem to be, they give lip service to this, but they don't follow up with meaningful action. And that again is I find is appalling. But then, when we looked in the council, like the people that we were dealing with weren't bad people. If I met them at, Fox Creek Winery, which I think is where we met once, you'd get on with them. They're just, they're normal everyday people who, are doing their job. And I think they're doing their job without good leadership. The leaders, are either have poor targets or terrible strategies, or they're spread too thin. And I probably suspect maybe it's a bit of both, actually, that they're, or all of the above, should I say. But again, I've sort of learned, I used to get really angry at the individual, and now I just go, you know what, it's not the individual, it's the system. It's frustrating. It is what it is. I'm able to silo that pretty well these days and just work on. I think the other thing as well, in very early days, I remember my first deal, I got very emotional over it when it was going a bit south at one point, and we had lawyers involved and the two sides. It was quite litigious, and it was completely uncommercial. Having the
just
lawyers
personal issues coming up, was it?
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It was incompetency based on the land. We were buying land off a multinational publicly listed company. The guy running it was incompetent and had a massive ego. And I was too emotionally involved. And what I learned there was never work on one deal. So this deal was my whole life, and now I work on what have we got in the pipeline at the moment. We would have in the vicinity of probably 500 properties in the pipeline. So, across 4 developments. So,
It's a lot easier to be less emotional.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, maturity. I'm in my 50s now. I started the development business in my 30s. I think maturity of life and the way in which you approach things. COVID, I don't think there'll be any one of your listeners that wouldn't agree that COVID's probably had the biggest impact that there has been.
Changed things dramatically.
Unbelievably. And arguably almost unrecognisable. We are starting to see a shift back with trade, and one of the things we've been really trying to do over the last probably 12 months is build that relationship with the trade, because it was lost and burnt. And they distrusted us, and there was just a whole lot of mistrust. But we're working with those that we've sort of manage to maintain a relationship with buildings with some new people, and we're finding that pays great dividends. But more on a happiness scale, I find is where the dividend comes. I'm a happier developer today than I probably was 5 years ago. Definitely one that's probably more efficient, today, because I've, again, a little bit more experienced. And that's worked well, I think.
Fascinating. So, reflecting back on that earlier time and some of the mentors, and you mentioned Joseph Chow, were there any others that you learned particular insights from that you've applied since then?
Well, I think there's two parts to that question that I'd break down, and one is probably you're not 100% sure of the actual question you've asked me, but that I've heard. So, what have I learned? But I think what I've learned is that change is a part of our world. It's a part of life, and if you're not moving forward, you're going backwards, and it's stationary is going backwards in many respects. I also think one of the things that I'm more conscious of now is when we first started in our first probably 6 to 8 years, we're a 12-year-old business. Yeah, we were our first probably 6 to 8 years. We were the hunter. We were pursuing our competition. We were pursuing things that in a much more aggressive manner within business. And today, I feel we are the hunted. So there are companies out there that were like us, back in the day that are getting going, and they're probably looking more at us. We get copied more than most other developers around, and we probably people probably copy us more than most. And that used to upset me, but now I just consider it's a compliment. But what that has done is meant that if you're not innovating, if you're not progressing, if you're not staying at cutting edge, then you're going backwards. I think we were probably the most innovative development business years ago. I wouldn't say, this is in Adelaide, I should add. I don't think we are the most. I think we're up there, and I think in certain sectors we are. But across the board, I think there's areas that we really can push more and harder, and a lot of that for me is probably more around the environmental type side, where it's meaningful, not environmental where it's tokenistic or stuff where you tick a box because the computer says whatever. We're finding that that's a problem. This leads back to the government intervention in building code. I posed a question to one of these eco specialists. I said, are you better having a 4-star rated home with a 10 kilowatt solar system and a battery, or are you better having an 8-star home with no solar and no battery? What is better, And government is chasing the star rated system, but I'm not necessarily sure that that's the method that you should be doing. So I think that's probably one of those areas where we're trying to work out how does that work, and can you lobby government to maybe make exemptions if you have other factors that are going to implement or affect the way in which your homes, your bills, your carbon footprint within the area. So it'll be interesting to see where that lands. It keeps getting kicked down the road a little bit, but yeah.
That seems to be a little bit of the nature of how governments operate. Yep. But look, changing gears a little bit and talking about marketing, I've seen some fairly innovative things come from Kite. Can you talk a bit about some of the insights and what you've learned around marketing and how you find success?
Yeah. So marketing is obviously, coming as a marketing sales background, is really key. For me, it starts with good design. if a pig's a pig, even if you put lipstick on it. So you need to have a good design, and then you need to be, I guess, partnering with, we do have in-house capability, but that does have its limits, and partnering with, I guess, specialists within those areas. We've found, obviously, both at a design level and at a render level. I think it's really important how that works, and then how it's presented. They're probably the key. So you've then basically got I break down marketing into content and then into strategy. So how do you use that content is really important. And I guess, digital is probably the favoured and flavoured at the moment. It's very important to have a strong web presence, strong social platforms, and a strategy that's appropriate for that market. Some strategies want constant engagement, constant touching. Some don't. They want to be touched not so regularly. They find it annoying. I think selling a product versus selling a lifestyle. There are some developments where it's product, and there's some developments where I won't even mention the product, and it's all about how you live here. And I think, as a developer, if I was, reviewing, and we've got stuff at sort of the 500,000. I think our cheapest price point is about 400,000, and our most expensive price point's up at 1.8. So it's a fairly diverse range, across, in different sectors, in sort of inner up and coming suburbs, in leafy, blue chip suburbs, and then in industrial Portland suburbs. So, each of them have a very, very different way in which you would approach it. I think that's probably critical. And then not being afraid to say, well, shit, that strategy didn't work. We need to look at a different way. We do take advice from providers, but sometimes we just call BS on it and go, no, it feels like they're colouring by numbers now, and we go a little bit with our gut feeling or our own experience or what the market's telling us. Interestingly, if you want to know what people think of your product, ask them. You'll be amazed.
As simple as that.
Yeah. Look, it's quite funny. Sometimes people will be too embarrassed to tell you what they really think, or too polite. And other times you'll get a full hairdryer. So, and I whilst I hate getting hair dried by customers, those are the better learning curves. Yeah. You tend not to, when everything's going brilliantly well, you tend not to learn very much.
Yeah, and then COVID happens or something else comes out of the left field that you didn't even expect.
Picking a thread that you sort of picked up and probably would be a good point to finish on is AI.
Sure. Let's talk about that.
It's obviously it's a hot topic. I've been watching and considering AI over the last 2 years, I guess, with interest and what are the implications, because I believe it will be a disruptor. And look, I'm kind of known for making broad statements, and I'll start with this statement. I believe in 10 years' time, the property development industry will be unrecognisable from today. Now, I don't know what the unrecognisable part will be. I jokingly said to somebody yesterday, I think AI as a society will have a bigger impact than us discovering fire as a species. So, but whatever those huge impacts are, I don't believe we know what that is today. I'm not one of those alarmists that think AI is going to take over the planet either. I think it will be, by and large, and a majority of a force for good. I think there will be some people who will use it as a force for evil, or their own personal gain at others' expense. But I think the the way in which we'll work. And, I talked to some of my colleagues about this at one of our internal conferences, and, people heard that AI is going to take over my job. And I was like, no, that's not what I said. What I said is AI will have a huge impact on what you do. It will change your job. And unless you're nimble and open to that change, you will come to the wayside.
Taken out.
Yeah. But it's from, I've looked at, we've punched in designs into AI on an architectural design front to see. And look, some of it's pretty ordinary. Some of it's pretty good. And you have to really direct it. But, I heard a quote from Elon Musk the other day where he said, talking to a German AI conference, where he said the rate of growth is tenfold every 6 months. So, and people don't really understand I didn't really understand what that meant until I went, okay, well, year now is like 1. In 6 months, it's 10. In 12 months, it's 100. In 18 years of this, it's 1,000. In 24 months, it's 10,000. So in 24 months, you've gone from 1 to 10,000. That rate of acceleration is unheard of ever in our species. So, what does this mean? Watch this space. I think this is going to be an opportunity for those who understand it and embrace it. And I think it will be the demise of those who choose to ignore it or are not willing to embrace.
Yeah. Being an ostrich and putting the head in the sand is not going to be the solution. Yeah, very cool. All right, look, that I think brings us to a close to our chat. Damon, thank you so much for your time and all the insights. It was amazing. So just a little bit to close off. Thank you for listening to the Land Pioneers podcast. We look forward to bringing to you more and more really prominent figures in the land development industry across Australia. Thank you again for listening in. And if you like the episode, click like and subscribe, and we'll be in touch with you down the track. Thank you again.